One moment, let me get into the spirit. Wait. One more. Thank you for being here today.
I call upon the warrior mother.
Hello, romance girlies. I'm Lady Genevieve, and today I finally get to talk about what has been my most anticipated film ever since the end of 2022, when Avatar: The Way of Water was released into cinemas. Avatar: Fire and Ash.
It's my favorite movie of all time.
Yeah, me too.
Before we get into feedback, reviewing, discussing the material, the characters, and whatnot, I need to make some things clear from the very beginning. I am a massive fan of the Avatar films, as well as James Cameron as a filmmaker. I also find him to be a hilarious person when it comes to doing interviews.
Holy shit, look at that. That is a tankard. What do you call that?
I find his candor to be endlessly entertaining.
One of the lessons is caveat emptor.
And there's also so much insight to gain from listening to him talk about his art, his creative process, what inspires his storytelling. I don't think there's such a thing as unbiased film criticism, because everyone brings their own life experiences, their preferences, and so on and so forth into the viewing experience. James Cameron's Avatar films deliver maximalist visuals, exceptionally detailed world building, anti-imperialism, and a Titanic-sized boatload of romance. Those are all things that I love to see in films. He's also extremely committed to the theatrical experience, to building something that makes it worthwhile to go see these films on the big screen. And I happen to be someone that first and foremost favors the theatrical experience. I prefer to see films at the cinema. I pay for a monthly movie pass in order to be able to go as often as I like. So if you are someone that is going into watching a new Avatar film, either already biased against the films for whatever reason, you're probably not going to agree with any of how I experience a new installment in this ongoing film series. I saw Avatar: The Way of Water 15 times at the cinema during its original theatrical release. Now I have seen it 16 times because they re-released it into cinemas this year in the promotional lead-up to Fire and Ash. They re-released The Way of Water and added a sneak peek of Fire and Ash, so of course I went and saw it. The people who regularly watch my channel are very aware of how much I love these films, and James Cameron specifically as a filmmaker, because of how often I mention them in videos that are not about him or any of his films. That being said, it will surprise absolutely no one for me to say that I loved Fire and Ash. I will be going back and seeing it as many times as I have to at the cinema in order to ensure that we get Avatar 4 and 5. Fire and Ash is a grandiose, breathtaking spectacle that has to be seen to be believed. James Cameron's decades-long romanticism and environmentalism are foundational pillars of the world building and character arcs. Being that this is the third film in an ongoing series, I don't really see any point in talking about the film without going into full spoilers, because if you're not already invested at this point, if you are not following the development of the story and character journeys across the first two films, now going into the third, you will not really understand or appreciate the details of what's happening with multiple characters in Fire and Ash. The Mongguan clan is new, and you also meet the Wind Traders, but overall, a significant majority of the characters you're following are already in motion when it comes to their stories. If all you want to know is whether or not I recommend the film, whether or not I rate the film favorably, the answer is yes to both. 5 stars to Piacon, the Sullys, all of them including Spider, the Metkaina, the Omaticaya, Dr. Garvin, the Tulkun matriarch, the villains, not because I like them, but because they delivered the drama and conflict in abundance, and James Cameron.
So Avatar movies are expensive. If I could make them more expensive, I would. Because where does that money go? It doesn't get piled up out in the desert and set on fire like Burning Man. You know, it goes to people. People that are, trying to pay their mortgages and put their kids through school and, all of that stuff. So we're making lots of jobs. Over 3,000 people work on an Avatar film. If people don't go to the movie theaters, we can't keep doing it. It's pretty much that simple. So then the question is, all right, where are we going to see this kind of imaginative filmmaking? Are they going to do it for streaming at those cinematic levels? They promised a lot early on, 5 years ago, and there were big budgets to do kind of cinema equivalent kind of quality, but those budgets have all collapsed to half or a third of what they were. So now are we just going to give up and not have that kind of stuff anymore? I don't know the answer. We're going to have to see how this plays out. If people show up for this film, that's a good sign. I'll get a gig. I'm not worried, right? But I'm talking about who I was 40 years ago when I was making The Terminator. You know, I wouldn't be able to get a foothold. So, you know, I don't know how this is all going to play out, but I do think that if we collectively continue to honor the theatrical experience, that it won't fade away.
For any of you who are wondering if I will lock in my list and now do my top 10 video immediately after this video, I'm actually waiting just a bit longer because I still need to see The Secret Agent, which is the Brazilian film, which I'm going to do after I finish this Fire and Dash review. I'm doing something a bit different for my top 10 video this year, where I'm going to be expanding to include a lot more honorable mentions than I usually do. So I would like to see that film first, and then I will be able to decide whether or not to include that somewhere in the mix of all that I am planning to do for that video.
How do you still live?
But now, let's talk about all of the plot spoilers. This isn't going to be feedback drenched in overly fanciful prose. I want to have fun with a film that I love and sing its praises because of how it made me feel. Another point I would like to make is that I notice a lot of Western viewers seem to miss when it comes to these films, is that they make a significant amount of their box office profit outside of the imperial core. The subject matter of these films is something that tends to resonate more with people who have either directly lived through or are living through the aftermath of their own countries being attacked, invaded, destabilized, and pillaged by Western imperialism. James Cameron has said in interviews that I think it was something along the lines of 70% of the box office for the Avatar films comes from outside of North America. I remember when I had reviewed Ainda Estou Aqui earlier this year, there were a lot of anti-imperialist Brazilians commenting on my review, saying that I was one of the few non-Brazilian or maybe non-Latin American people that was reviewing the film that actually seemed to have somewhat of an understanding of various historical details related to the film's subject matter. And it was a refreshing thing to hear from commenters on YouTube, because normally if I relate a film's subject matter to anything, either historically political or political in a contemporary context, there will inevitably be complaints about demanding that I not politicize the art. Now, not all art is political, especially to the same degree. It entirely depends on the film itself, what that story is, which storytellers have conceived of that story. But when it comes to the Avatar films, they are extremely political. I'm going to show a screenshot of an interview James Cameron did during the Way of Water press cycle that I highly recommend all of you watch. And in this interview, he was going through various films from his career, and when it came to talking about making the Avatar films, he talked about, among other things, being an environmentalist from the time that he was a teenager. He talked about how after the first film was released, there were various indigenous environmentalists in various parts of South America who had reached out to him somehow. I don't know how they got a hold of him, but they asked him to help them with their work, their environmentalist efforts, specifically because they had said that what he was depicting was the very same thing as what they were and are currently experiencing. He has done that. And you can find plenty of material about him joining in on various environmentalist efforts. In that interview, he also explained that he had almost bailed on filmmaking altogether, but he opted to return to make another Avatar film, that being The Way of Water, in the hopes of reaching more people on a larger scale, the way that he can if it's done through a feature film, and get them to care more about environmentalism. And I can't speak for everyone that has watched these films, but for me, as someone that has been changed on a cellular level by how deeply I have connected to these stories, I now constantly worry about things related to the ocean, the forests. Now, that is not only because of those films, but the films definitely were influential in pushing me towards looking into more of all of the real life equivalent of what battles are fought in those films, of violent colonialism that is perpetrated all over the world, but especially in the global south, to try to steal natural resources for corporate profit with no regard to the violence, deaths, destruction, all of that results from doing those things. Following that point, there was a detail that I became aware of that is in The Way of Water, that is now also present in Fire and Ash, that I would like to call attention to before I start to go through things a bit more sequentially and sectioning some of my feedback based off of covering certain characters. In the previous film, if you paid close attention to it, You will have noticed that on the uniforms of the recoms, there was a patch that had an abbreviated version of the name Project Phoenix. What's Project Phoenix? Well, to put it in an extremely short explanation, that is the name of a counterinsurgency operation that was run in Vietnam during the Vietnam War. Also, it was sponsored by the CIA. In other news, water is wet. The Phoenix program would become one of the most controversial aspects of America's war in Vietnam. Witnesses claimed that members of the program's teams and their American advisors routinely carried out torture, murders, and assassinations. Accusations that American officials denied. Considering the conversations we've seen James Cameron have with the likes of George Lucas, where George Lucas has been very matter-of-fact in explaining how Star Wars was created specifically in the context of the rebels being representative of the Viet Cong and the Empire being the US. I'm not even remotely surprised to see James carrying on with this sort of line of thinking in the Avatar films. And if you're bothered by me pointing out a patch with unobstructed text plastered on the front of Miles Quaritch's uniform, I'll say allegedly, even though I know what my eyes saw. But now let me talk you through my experience of watching Fire and Ash for the first time. When they did the opening studio logos where they show you the production companies that are involved in whatever it is that you're about to watch, when they played the Lightstorm logo, I had a Pavlovian response. I had this swell of emotions and I had to take a deep breath because I was immediately thinking to myself, well, don't be ridiculous. The story hasn't even officially begun. Clearly, I had the sensorial association to all of the times that I watched The Way of Water, and the sound of the Lightstorm jingle was transporting me back to Pandora. Just when I thought that I would keep it together, the story begins, and the first thing we see in the film is Loak flying through the sky with Neteyam, and immediately I started to cry. Because what do you mean I'm seeing Neteyam again? What do you mean he's telling Loak, High 4, and now he actually knows that he's dead? He didn't know he was dead when Jake was visiting him at the end of the last film. He just was fishing in the forest, none the wiser.
Why are you crying? She's happy to see you. Boy.
Oh my god. And then I spent the next 3 hours crying off and on, but it was fairly consistent. And that is the power of these films, their storytelling, the world building, how immersive of an experience it is to visit Pandora through these films, especially in Dolby 3D. Then I quickly realized that this film is happening more or less the day after the last film ended. Neytiri is still in the funeral garb from Neteyam's funeral, Ronal is still about to give birth, and it took Jake all of 5 seconds to backtrack on all of the progress we thought he had made at the end of the previous film. He's too overcome with the grief and trauma from Neteyam's death, and now he's picking on Loak the same way he was for the entire last film. So you mean to tell me that you uprooted your family, you made them leave the forest, the only home that they had ever known, you appointed a new Oloektan of the Omaticaya, Tarsem, whom I must say I was pleasantly surprised to see pop back up again in this film. I was not expecting to ever see him again. You move your family to join the Metcaina clan. You demand that your children behave themselves, that they work hard and learn the ways of the Metcaina, that they assimilate into their new home, and then you don't even know the most basic fundamental pillar of the Metcaina, the way of water, which is how to breathe correctly. Your son has to swim to the bottom of a sinking ship to save you. He has to coach you on how to breathe because you apparently never learned how to do it yourself. He and Payakon got you to the surface on time so that you didn't die, and we got this beautiful moment of familial connection, of emotional catharsis. You told your son, Oengati Kamaye, I see you. You told him that, and now you've immediately backtracked. I was ready to fight because the Sully children are my children. That's my family. You can't tell me they're not. My $3 Patreon tier is called Sully Stick Together. And do you know why? Because Sullys stick together. And to be clear, my upset at Jake's behavior is not a criticism of the film. It's a genuine expression of the emotional investment in and passion for these stories. They are highly effective at making me care about what's happening. And that's how you know they're excellent. I care very much. And now we get this expansion of the lore. It's not just the way of water has no beginning and no end. The sea is around you and in you. Now we get Loak as narrator, saying something about the sea washing away your sins. And I would be interested to know if James Cameron was interested in invoking some sort of mythological, biblical references, because I just feel as though the word sins often has a religious connotation, and Ewa is the deity of Pandora. She's basically like Mother Nature or something like that. And that scene where Jake brings Spider into the forest and he considers sacrificing him, he's basically praying to Ewa, asking her to intervene if he shouldn't do it. Isn't there a Bible story that does something like that? I'm not a theologist, and I don't want to search for biblical stories because then it's going to mess up my algorithms and I'm going to get a bunch of social media grifters on my feeds. So if you just happen to already know that story, feel free to share the details. I find Fire and Ash to be emotionally compelling in how it addresses the traumatic grief and aftermath of the trauma of war, where you see people who have lost something or someone in war, and then they turn towards rage and anger in a way that is impulsive and irrational. They project that rage beyond the scope of where it would be best focused. Neytiri, who has always been skeptical about Spider hanging around the Sully family, is now more hateful towards him than ever before. She does not want him around. Whenever people try to act like Spider is a sibling to Kiri, I scoff because you're not paying attention. Jake likened him in the previous film to a stray cat just hanging around.
He wasn't part of our family. He was like a stray cat, just always around.
Now the boys call him cousin, but it's really more like the neighborhood kid who lives on the same street or a block away. So the traumatic aftermath of the previous two films, Neytiri has lost her sister, her father, and now her firstborn son. She has every reason to be angry. But directing that anger at Spider is not a useful way to channel that anger. That's not going to stop the Sky People from continuing to attack the Tulkuns, to do further deforestation, to expand their base and do more mining. Spider would be more than happy to join the Na'vi on missions to destroy the colonial entity that is the RDA. There's a James Connolly quote that says, "Discontent, my friends, is the fulcrum upon which the lever of thought has ever moved the world to action." It's correct to be upset at the Sky People, specifically the RDA, out on that base, who are leading this charge and doing the most violent actions against all of Pandora, but you have to channel your anger into action. You need to plan, you need to organize, strategize. Being mad at your teenage future son-in-law is not going to save Pandora. Even if they had sacrificed him in the forest, that would not have stopped the Tulkun hunts or deforestation. Focus, Neytiri. Don't get distracted and be a fool.
That's not what I said. I asked you not to be one.
And James Cameron is so matter-of-fact and intentional with certain recurring imagery and points of focus. Neytiri didn't change her mind and have this epiphany until she was washing her face paint disguise off, and then her hands were red. And the camera is close enough to focus on her hands the same way they did at the end of The Way of Water when Neteyam died, and they moved in to show you Loak looking at his hands that were covered in Neteyam's blood. When I saw that 3 years ago, I thought to myself, oh, James Cameron is telling us exactly what the next chapter of Loak's arc will do.
Oh, my son.
Hence, when the film opens and he's with Neteyam, who tells Loak that it's not his fault, but when Loak is arguing with his father, what does Jake say? He blames Loak. Neytiri sees her hands have the appearance of being bloodstained, and it's a way of externalizing what's going on with her internally, for her to finally realize that all that would happen if they sacrificed Spider would be just more senseless bloodshed. It wouldn't actually help the bigger problems they have to deal with on Pandora. I do want to talk about the younger generation, but first I want to mention another detail of recurring imagery that I picked up on in Fire and Ash. I'm fairly certain I've talked about this before, but in The Way of Water, there was this detail of how there's a significance to prominent male characters being cut on their chest. When Jake appoints Tarsem to be the new Oloektan of the Omaticaya, part of the ritual of transferring that leadership is that Tarsem puts a knife up to Jake's chest, and then he pulls it back, and it's representative of a death of sorts.
The leader must die. So the leader can be born.
Then, when Neytiri holds Spider hostage on the Sky People's warship to demand that Quaritch release her daughters, whom Quaritch was holding hostage, she cuts Spider on the chest, and it's very similar to Jake.
Son for son.
Please, don't hurt her. Ah!
And now, in Fire and Ash, when Quaritch seeks out the Mongquan so he can recruit them as allies, Varong gives Quaritch a cut on the chest. Now, I have only seen Fire and Ash once so far, but clearly there's something deeper to extrapolate from this. There's something symbolic and ritualistic about this and how it fits into the larger narrative, so I just wanted to draw attention to that yet again. Now, jumping generations for a bit, I was so happy to see that the teenagers have finally worked out their differences. In the last film, we had a lot of this Metkaina aggression towards the Omaticaya newcomers, but now seeing them all on the same side and working together just warmed my heart in a way that I didn't know I should be looking forward to, but I welcomed it immensely when it finally happened. Aonung and Rotro were being such brats in the last film, and now seeing them on the same side as Loak, Kiri, Tuk, Tsireya, and Payakon, it was so worth it to finally reach this payoff after all of the conflicts that happened in the previous film. And what I loved about seeing the youth all united the way that they were is that it really embodied this sentiment that always sticks with me that came from Huey Newton, where he said something about how the revolution has always been in the hands of the young always inherit the revolution. So they all have to make their case to the older generation. They are coming into their own about not just being able to join the ongoing fight for Pandora, but also be the leaders of that fight. Payakon in particular has to go on this whole, well, I don't know what we would call it. He has to go seek out his family clan and bring back the one and only survivor who has been left highly mutilated by the RDA. Payakon and Loak and all of the other teenagers have to stand up against the older generation who are misguided and stuck in their ways. Their philosophy has become antiquated given the threat that the Sky People are posing to them and all of Pandora. So when Loak declared himself an outcast and Tsireya did the same, oh my god, I had full body chills. This is why I cannot take any critic seriously who tries to claim that Fire and Ash is simply doing just everything we've already seen in The Way of Water. Spider can breathe Pandoran air now. Payakon has been accepted back with the Tulkuns. What are you so-called professionals talking about? Did you pay attention at all? Do you not bring notepads when preparing to review a film? Because that's what I do. I'm scribbling away in the dark, especially for a film that is over 3 hours long.
It's been 84 years.
And I still need to rewatch this film at least a dozen more times because even I, as someone who is hyperfixated on these films, knows that there are details that I do not have memorized after watching only one time. Rest in Ewa, Rotro. We hardly knew ye, but glory to every Navi and every living being of Pandora that went out swinging against the colonial Sky People. Ronal and Tonowari, I would have liked to see a bit more of Tonowari, but he is still alive, so of course I am assuming he will still be around in an Avatar 4, and I'm intrigued to see how he would move as a leader of the Metkaina without Ronal, because she had such a commanding, imposing presence as Tsahik, and we love her for that. So it would just be interesting to see how Tonowari evolves after losing her, and also having a new baby to look after, and also after having these back-to-back conflicts with the Sky People, and these game-changing, culture-shifting meetings with the Tulkuns, and the teenagers successfully arguing their philosophy into ongoing plans of action. Ronal being stabbed, and she's bleeding out, but first she needs to give birth. An absolute mad woman, a warrior. I love her. I'm obsessed with her. And not only that, we continue to see this reverence for mothers and for matriarchy. Remember when the Tulkuns were charging into battle and the leader of them, she told Payakon that she was going to lead the charge, and Payakon responded, "Yes, matriarch." Oh my stars in the sky. There is no other movie like this where I'm just witnessing iconic cinema, banger after banger, emotional gut punches over and over again. This is like how I read history books, and anytime I read about workers striking or people protesting and successfully bullying the political powers that be into expanding human rights, it just makes me want to yell. but in a good way, because I feel so energized and motivated at all that humanity can do when motivated and organized to enact necessary changes for the good of all instead of just for the benefit of a few. And there was a line in Fire and Ash, I don't remember if it was Jake who said it, perhaps it was him when he was reclaiming the title, The Mantle of Toruk Makto. Oh, that was so exciting. But he was summoning all of the clans into battle against the Sky People, and the line was something like, many arrows together cannot be broken, and I thought to myself, oh, is this the Na'vi version of El Pueblo Unido Jamás Será Vencido? That's fabulous. I love that. Can you please teach me how to say that actually in the Na'vi language, though? Because let me remind you that most of the time when we hear the characters speaking English, they're actually speaking the indigenous language of the Na'vi. They explained how all of this works and how it's presented at the very beginning of The Way of Water.
Took a few years to get the language through my thick skull. But now when I hear it, might as well be English.
Let's talk about Kitty and Spider. There is so much material for both of them in this film. I cannot talk about everything because I am a one-woman show. I do all of this myself, and if I indulge in every single detail of all that happened with them, this video would be 12 hours long, and I cannot be doing that when I still have to do my top 10 video. I'm doing an end of the year video about adaptations. I also recorded my next source material video, and I need to edit that, as well as my next My Lady Jane reaction for Patreon, which has already been recorded. I started editing it, and then I went and saw Fire and Ash, and now we're talking about that because that's priority number one. People have been trying to deny that Kitty and Spider are a romantic item since The Way of Water, and you can be a naysayer all you want, but I happen to go to the school of James Cameron as a romance girly. Look at the proof. Sarah Connor and Kyle Reese? Kyle Reese, who traveled through time to save her? Have you not seen the deleted scene where he cried over the beauty of a flower and the beauty of Sarah Connor herself? You're not going to tell me that environmentalism and romanticism are not pillars of James Cameron's storytelling. It's been there since 40 years ago. And Kyle Reese died for her. And then we have Bud and Lindsay in The Abyss. They act like they're angry and divorced, but deep down, we know the truth, and that truth is brought to the surface when they're both ready to die for each other. Why? Because love. True love. Titanic, yet another man ready to die for the woman he loves. James Cameron said, "You're not really the main man of the story unless you will enthusiastically sacrifice yourself for your lady love." Was Jack Dawson angry that he was freezing to death? No, he was cheerful as can be under the freezing cold circumstances. He was telling her to live her life to the fullest. This is how I know that directors are powerful, because I only find LDC truly appealing if he's directed by romance girlies, and those being James Cameron and Baz Luhrmann. And now in the Avatar universe, Jake and Neytiri are foundational to the romanticism of this world. Their love story built this universe from the ground up. But James Cameron is aging the correct way, so he's grown so much more sentimental as the years have gone by. Now that we have Fire and Ash, we have Jake and Neytiri, Loak and Sireya, Spider and Kitty argue with the wall, and now Quaritch and Varang. Both those villains are still alive, by the way, and Spider didn't die in the forest. Also, technically, we also had Ronal and Tonawari, but to be honest, I feel like Kate Winslet is high profile to an entirely different degree than a significant amount of the people in this cast, so it reaches a point where you do have to let her go. She came in, she strut her stuff, she was iconic, and now she's not having to stay attached to an ongoing franchise. She's got her prestige dramas that she needs to do, and that's fine. We're just happy that she took the time out of her busy schedule to visit Pandora. But everyone else, oh, yeah, James Cameron is a romance girly. You're sticking around. Romance is in the air. The fact that Kitty defied the laws of nature itself to fundamentally change Spider on a cellular level to save him, there is no one else feeding the romance girlies like this at the cinema. James Cameron is one of us. I had wanted to talk about so many things related to Avatar over the last 3 years, but I never got around to making additional videos because it felt like it was too niche of a thing that my regular viewers would not care to listen to me talk about unless it's actually a current topic. So I just kept putting it off, and now we're here. But we can go back and I'll tell you that After immersing myself in The Way of Water, and I was really reflecting on the ending, specifically the fact that Spider saved Quaritch from the ship, to me some of that read like he needed to prove that he was not his bio-father's son. He was held hostage and forced to go on those violent military ops of terrorizing and brutalizing Na'vi and the wildlife, and Spider was devastated by that experience. That boy has been Na'vi from the beginning. He has never been a sky person. He's living the Na'vi way. So I felt like he needed to prove that he's not like that violent military thug that he's been stuck with. There were other more complicated emotions at play as well, but that felt like a leading factor of why he made that decision to spare his life. But then on the back end of that, on a storytelling, engineering side of things, I had theorized, and I had talked about this with people that I know in real life, I was theorizing that they needed to keep Quaritch alive and have him feel some sort of paternal instinct towards Spider, because I thought that Quaritch was going to go back to the RDA base and he was going to make an argument of how they needed to build an avatar for Spider. I thought that they would build a new blue 5-fingered avatar for Spider, and then that would be the full circle of Spider being able to fully live among the Na'vi the way that he was clearly always destined to be. But I'm so glad that the story went the way that it actually went and not how I had theorized. And why is that? Because it's more romantic. What do you mean Kitty is writhing on the forest floor and doing a never-before-seen ritual to change Spider on a cellular level so that he doesn't die? James Cameron is one of us. And if you somehow missed the entire boatload of clues that Spider was in love with Kitty that entire previous film, what movie were you watching? The tail pulling? That's how Na'vi flirt. The yearning, the longing as he stares at her, the way that they were trying to escape from the recoms in the forest when they had taken the children captive. Spider was trying to run out of there with Kitty, and what happened? One of the recoms yanked Kitty back by her kuru. So what did Spider do when they were running away the second time? He pushed Kitty in front of him, so that this time, if anyone was going to get snatched up, it would be him. That's a James Cameron romantic lead if ever I saw one. He knows what we want to see. And I will be very clear, I love Spider. That's my short king. It was so funny when he was asking Kitty if she couldn't have made him taller, and she merely emphasized that he's perfect just how he is. Oh, she took the words right out of my mouth. Did you not see him in this movie, in Fire and Ash, when he's constantly being thrown into situations where the recoms and the Mongwans are charging at him, and they are twice his size, and that doesn't matter because he's always ready. He will have a tiny blade, and that's just going to have to do because the fight is here, so he's ready to jump in. This is why he gets to breathe Pandoran air and live. This is why he grew a kuru. This is why he gets to convene with the ancestors. He has repeatedly proven himself to be worthy. He is for the people, and which people are those? The Na'vi. When Jake takes him into the forest and Spider realizes what's happening, he doesn't even get angry. He understands exactly why Jake is seemingly about to do this. The tears that I was having, the emotions, I was absolutely wrecked watching this movie, and I will be wrecked every time I go back and rewatch it. And Kitty, oh wow, an icon. I know I'm jumping ahead here, but the fact that the culmination of everything she's going through with her powers, her identity crisis, her coming of age story, is that she single-handedly overpowers Varong, the scariest Na'vi we've seen to date, is to make Tsahelu with her and just impose her might, her power against her. She's 15 in this movie. When we see Kitty as an adult, I cannot even conceive of how the Sky People will stand a chance at that point. She's going to destroy them. And I will cheer her on because they'll have gotten exactly what they deserve. Side note, why is Parker Selfridge alive? James, don't you know that the people love to see a CEO get wiped out? Avatar 4, get rid of him. Do you know how annoyed I was when he showed up again in this movie? I was delighted when watching the Na'vi send him and those other colonizers off packing at the beginning of The Way of Water. And then we get to Fire and Ash and he's on Pandora again. Get him out of here. Permanently. Final destination. Neytiri and Spider are about to be the most powerful couple in all of Pandora. All the naysayers, go ahead and say nay, but the proof is in Dolby 3D, the proof is in IMAX, and I'm so relieved that James Cameron saved the day because there has been far too little romance on the big screen this year, so he just put all of the romance in this movie. They didn't do quite as much in the development of Loak and Sirea's romance this time around, but that's also because Loak is in the thick of his guilt and the trauma of losing Neteyam. He's not exactly in the optimum headspace right now to be perfect boyfriend material. But we know he can get there and presumably will in Avatar 4. He needs to work on himself. He needed to save Payakan and the Tulkuns. There was a lot going on with him, and he's still an icon for that. And she's an icon for standing up to her parents. When she told Ronal that she would never see her again, when Sirea was standing up for Payakan, my jaw was on the floor. Again, I ask, how are you a professional film critic if you say this movie is just the way of water repeated? Sirea got shushed by her father in the last film. Do you not remember that? Because I do, and she did shush.
Sirea, you disappoint me, daughter.
Well, you know what? She won't be shushed anymore. I was so glad we actually got to see the Omaticaya again. The problems with these films being as incredible as they are and doing so much to build this world is that you want to be there and you want to see all of it, but you can only be in so many places at a time and really get to know those corners of the world. I really need to do a rewatch of the first film because I really want to be in the forest again. I despise the villains in the Avatar films, but that's not a judgment of their quality, but merely a natural response to being genuinely emotionally invested in the story. And the heroes of the story, those being the indigenous people of Pandora, the Navi, and more specifically, those who treat nature and other living beings as something sacred. Una Chaplin was a fabulous addition to the story. Her performance was magnificent. I'm glad that so many nefarious sky people have been disposed of in this latest battle because it will mean that the next time we have 3 hours of glorious Avatar storytelling, we will not need to divide as much of that time among so many villains. Now, there are still loads of sky people colonizers on the RDA base, but only a handful of those are people who are named characters that the audience meets in any sort of substantial way. Now we have Varang, Quaritch, and to a lesser degree his sidekick Recom Wayne Fleet. I don't know if he's been quite as Navi built as Quaritch has, so I don't know if he would be out there staying with the Monquans the way that presumably Quaritch is. Among the sky people, we've now gotten rid of General Ardmore and Scoresby, and oh wow, I didn't talk about that, did I? I've been waiting for 3 years for Payakan to finish the job and to actually see it happen in Dolby 3D. Wow. What a time to be alive. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean that the Tulkun hunting won't still be a threat in an Avatar 4 or 5, but they could mostly remove it in the larger narrative or downsize it because it's now so dangerous for them to try to do that because the Tulkuns will actually fight back now like they should have been doing the whole time. I don't think it's something they can attempt to include the way that they used to. Thematically, I find the Monquans and Varang in particular to be a really interesting addition to the story because it leans into this idea of succumbing to the worst emotional tendencies following a traumatic loss. There's clearly supposed to be a parallel of sorts between Varang surviving this destructive loss of fire and ash and feeling abandoned by Eywa, so she turns away from Eywa. But then you have Neytiri, who also goes down a path of hate. You saw her still as can be. When Spider's mask was malfunctioning in the middle of the night, she made no move to try to save him. But unlike Varang, Neytiri clung to her faith even more. She will not abandon or turn away from Eywa. And she's actually the one that finds her way back from hate. She changes her mind about Spider. And it goes to show that you can't just mindlessly spread violence because you're traumatized by a violent loss. And actually, I have questions about Varang's backstory because I need to know more details. I need to hear her speech again in the film because what is the timeline of all of what she described? What sort of fire was she talking about? Because remember in the beginning of The Way of Water when the Sky People returned to Pandora and it was this devastating sequence of fire raining down on the forest again and trees and animals were being incinerated? A lot of times I have to look away on rewatches because it'll disrupt me too much and I will get nothing done for the rest of the day. But really, what was the source of Varang's trauma? Because I'm not claiming that it was the Sky People because I don't feel like I heard enough in what she said to confirm that to be the case. but it would be something really dramatic in the way that certain character arcs are developing. If Quaritch becomes increasingly Na'vi-pilled, and then if Varong turns away from aligning with the RDA, it would just be very interesting if that alliance were to fracture. So then she's still a villainous figure and threat, but if she is also against the RDA, I'm just saying I wouldn't mind seeing her rain fire down upon them. I would watch it. I'm not going to be the bigger person when it comes to the RDA. Anytime things are going badly for the RDA, I'm popping popcorn. I'm entertained. I'm enjoying the show. Is Varong simply traumatized by way of a natural disaster that happened on Pandora? As far as I'm aware, we don't know how old she is other than her being an adult Na'vi. Was she traumatized as a child from violent actions of the RDA and she's mistakenly blaming Ewa for that? Again, I don't know if that's what happened. This is why I'm saying I have questions and I need to see Avatar 4. I'm also fascinated by the way Jake was working on Quaritch. He's telling him that he really needs to see Pandora. I think he's telling him to not just make Sahelu with the creatures he flies on and gets around so he can do damage, but he really needs to connect with nature at large, maybe a spirit tree, and once he does that, he's going to have a total existential crisis. I would love to see it. That's what I'm assuming that this story is doing and where it's going. We'll see though. You want to make him see the light in the end? That's fine, but he still needs to go. I'm not forgiving either of them. His only redemption can come through sacrificing himself for the characters that we actually care about. I'm not in the business of forgiving war criminals. And Varong, her gleefully cutting Kurus for no reason whatsoever, she was the one that attacked them out of nowhere. Absolutely not. You're not going to make me root for her because what? Gaslight, gatekeep, girl boss? There are plenty of women in real life who are criminals and commit crimes against humanity and against the environment, against the world at large. I don't give them a pass, and I'm not giving Varong one either.
I'd put a stake through her heart and garlic around her neck to make sure she never come back.
But for the sake of compelling storytelling, for the drama, for the sake of watching interesting villains, fictional villains, be a problem? Yes, I would much rather those two be the main villains in play instead of people like General Ardmore or Scoresby. Good riddance to them both. And now, the MVP who finally came into his own, the one that I had been waiting to see get active since 3 years ago. Dr. Garvin. Now, I might say plenty of mean-spirited things towards the Sky People as a general tendency, and I stand by all of that. But when you say things against the Sky People, obviously we're talking about the RDA, the colonial invaders that are spreading mass death and destruction. You don't hear any of us calling for the demise of the scientists in the forest lab. We like them because they're good people. Dr. Garvin, the man that you are, they were putting so much focus on him in The Way of Water that I knew there were bigger plans for him. It was so clear when he said, "That's why I drink," the way that the instant Pyakon jumped up and got active and Dr. Garvin was just happy to get to watch science in action. I love him. It was a genuinely dangerous situation he was in. He was in one of the boats. There were Metkaina attacking from all angles, and rightfully so. And Pyakon had a grudge that he was going to handle. And what was Dr. Garvin doing? He was talking trash and making jokes. "I thought you were the intelligent species, Scoresby." Hilarious. I love him. I'm obsessed with him.
Man your weapons! I thought you were the intelligent species here, Scoresby. Shot you kind called Garvin.
And I just knew he doesn't belong there. He doesn't belong with the RDA. He should either be with the science nerds in the forest lab, or he should have his own little setup with or near the Metkaina. So that begged the question of how we were going to get him there. Then we reached Fire and Ash, and he was pleading his case once again, trying to be reasonable, trying to stop this horrific violence against the Tulkuns. And what happens? The camera holds on him. And you can see him making a decision. He's going to get active, and I got so giddy. I could not wait to see what he was about to do. And the juxtaposition of him operating heavy machinery to bust Jake out of his cell, and then he proceeds to fangirl to Jake and tell him that he's so inspired by what he's done. The love of my life. Dr. Garvin, you are an icon. You are so diva. You are eternal. And then he ran off. We did not see him during that final bit of action in the film. He told Jake what he needed to know. He warned him. And, you know, I would not be surprised in the slightest if in the midst of all of that commotion, if Dr. Garvin maybe doesn't even get caught. I mean, maybe he will. He could get reprimanded. But I also would not put it past these people at the RDA to just be so in denial about him that they do not even believe or consider that he could have rebelled. because those people do not see him as a threat whatsoever. And there's just no way that James Cameron would throw out a character as fabulous as Dr. Garvin. If he was going to heroically die saving the Tulkuns, we would have seen him die. If we don't see the death, they're not dead. James Cameron does not obfuscate those details. We did not see Quaritch, specifically the Recom Quaritch, or Varang die, so both of them are still alive. We did not see Dr. Garvin die, so he's still alive as well. To summarize, I loved this movie. Follow my Letterboxd account to see how many times I end up seeing this one at the cinema. At minimum, we will be hitting double digits, but beyond that, I genuinely don't know where we will land. These films are like books. There is so much world building. There are so many details that you have to pay attention to in order to get the full experience. And I will not rest peacefully until we get Avatar 4 reconfirmed. Avatar 4 and 5 are already on my Letterboxd watch list. They've been there for ages. And also, why was Spider saying pendejo in this movie? Since when does he know Espanol? See, I need answers. Movie of the year. I could say more, but this is already going to be a lot for me to edit quickly when I have so many other videos to finish for the end of this year. Oh, and Spider, when he asked to keep that necklace, Quaritch's necklace, I immediately thought, oh, he's going to use that to break out. See, I thought he was going to use it on the keypad somehow, but undoing the screws also works. That's why Spider is exactly who I thought he was. Diva, you did that. Oh, el gatti kamaye.
Disruption.